Hello. I thought the podcast was actually really, really interesting. I thought it was kind of eye-opening, and I thought it gave really good insight into the formation of sort of, I guess, the same version of what the Harvard implicit bias test was. Um, I thought it was really interesting listening to it for the hour, and I thought that it gave really good insight into how so many people in various leadership positions, or even non-leadership positions, have implicit bias and how it affects everybody else. Implicit bias can be actually very detrimental. It can implore people to discriminate. It can make people feel uncomfortable with people who are not like them around, and then it trickles down into sort of this system of, again, discrimination and or unnatural or negative attitudes toward people who are different than you. And to answer the first question, what do you think about the connection between implicit bias and leader traits, behaviors, and actions? I think that there is a clear connection because implicit bias sort of informs your worldview and how you view other people who are different than you. So if you have certain implicit biases that you have not dealt with, had to work through, and have gone relatively unchecked, and that you are still using those biases against people, it does change your behavior because it changes how you behave and you interact with other people who are different than you. So if you're a leader, you might feel that a certain group of people aren't as responsible, and so you won't give that person of that certain group as much responsibility or as large a project or even a promotion. Two, how has this played out in your own leadership experiences? Well, I think that we all have our prejudices. I think that we all struggle with them every day, and I think that it's part of an issue to make sure that that we can sort of understand people who are different like this, that we can make sure that everybody in our worldview is understood, heard, and accepted. But that's not easy, especially for people who did not grow up in places that have very diverse populations. I was very fortunate enough to grow up in a very diverse population. My high school was almost 90% non-white. And so you got that, I was able to get that from an early age. And, taking the test, I found that I didn't have any discrepancy or any preference based on race, gender, or sexuality, which I was very pleased with. But to answer the question, I believe that, in my school administration, there were kids who were stopped up and down the hallway who didn't have a hall pass. I was able to walk through all the time and without a pass. No one said anything, but there were kids who looked different than me, Latino, black, that got stopped all the time. And I think it plays it down to who do we view as trustworthy, who do we view as suspicious, who do we view as the other, and what actions are taken against people who we consider to be the other when we don't take those same actions against people that look like they're in the majority. To answer number 3, how does this shape your thinking about leadership? I think that if you want to be a leader, you need to make sure that you can adequately, lead and work with other people who are different than you. And I think that takes into account learning their perspective, going through trainings to make sure that you can accurately understand them, to make sure that you don't have thoughts or that you actively work against any thoughts you may have that could impact them in a negative light or in a negative way. And I think that if you're going to lead and if you're going to be a leader, you should take that opportunity to be a leader and make sure that you can accurately lead other people who are different than you by making sure to expand your perspective to take in account their perspective. For number 4, how might implicit association tests be relevant to our leadership development? How does it prompt you to think about leadership and why? I think that they are relevant because that they will expose biases we don't think we have. On this campus, it's relatively liberal, and I think most of us, I would hope, come from diverse backgrounds where we've had interactions with people from all walks of life. But, many of us still have our prejudices. We still have our difficulties understanding people who are like this, and there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of fear that either we offend somebody or that we'll get something wrong, that we don't want to question and ask questions to other people who are different than us for fear of being ignorant. And it takes that extra step to be a leader, to make sure that everybody is comfortable, to make sure that everybody is accounted for and heard. And so I think an implicit association test is relevant and is wise because it gives us all an opportunity to check our biases to make sure that and then at least acknowledging what they are, we can take another step forward in saying, what can we do to fix them? And how does it prompt you to think about leadership and why? Leaders got to lead. I think plain and simple. So if you're a leader and you find out that there is an issue that you have with your person, with you as a person, and you know that there are certain groups that you favor tend to others, then that's where you got to step up to the plate and actually be a leader and make sure that you're not just representing one kind of person or a certain group of people. You represent everybody. And so what are you going to do to take that opportunity to make sure that everybody is represented? And how might implicit bias play out in this class? What strategies might we use to minimize negative effects of implicit bias in the class and other leadership spaces? This is my first time in a primarily white institution, and the class is primarily white. Not to throw white people into the bus, but, white people and people across the board, but I believe white people especially can be very prejudiced toward people who are not white. And I think that whether it's intended or not, we have misconceptions about people of color and of certain minority groups that have been detrimental to those groups and have taken opportunities away from them at their expense so we can, get a foot forward. I think that what we need to do, especially as white people, is make sure that we understand other people's perspectives, that we ask questions, that we listen, and that we make sure that other people feel accepted and part of the community. And I think that what we can do, invest in our position to make sure that we minimize the role of implicit bias, is to try to check our own biases. And don't be afraid that, if somebody calls you out for saying something that could be offensive, hear them out. And have an open dialogue. Discuss. And I think that we can apply that generally across the leadership board. And I think that's probably the best course of action. All right, thanks.